Hey, welcome back in, everyone. It's Mark again with the Presence Network. I want to encourage you to go to the Presence Network and visit the website. I have a really dear friend, and I'm sure there are other things, but one thing I'm thinking about in particular is a dear friend of mine has put some really good writings in there, and I think they'll encourage you and help you on your journey to a closer walk with God. That brings me to my the next thing that I'd like to share, and that is that I do want you to have a closer walk with God. I believe fully that there is a God. I know that I'm going to refer to the Bible quite a bit today. It is a writing that I believe to be full of truths that will enrich and encourage your life. I have received from other writings. For example, I know there are a lot of uncanonized books that the religious crowd doesn't care for so much, but I have found them to be beneficial, and I may reference a few of those as well. But really and truly, I just want you to understand that there is a way for you to be free and to have peace in your life, and God is really the only way. I know that sounds simple, but really it is. We do, however, have to change the way we approach God. I spoke to a dear friend of mine a couple of days ago. He made the comment that I've always just kind of had a different approach. One of the things that I would like to encourage you in is that I don't so much look at it as a different approach as that I think it's a genuine approach. I want to approach God from a pure heart, from someone who just really, really, really wants the truth, and without any agenda, without any motive. My motive is pure. I want to know God more than I did the day before, and there are resources there for us. But the most important resource is that which is within. And my first Bible reference is this. Jesus makes a statement in the New Testament that the kingdom is not that which you can say, look, there it is, or here it comes. The kingdom meaning the kingdom of God. It is within. And if we cannot realize that some of these things we study and some of these things we memorize, it's really easy to get caught up in memorizing verses and chapters in the Bible. It's another thing for them to be in you and in your heart and on your mind. And, the book of Jeremiah talks about God's desire for the words, his law, it says, to be written in your hearts and on your mind. He wanted the Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, to have his law in their hearts and on their minds. Now, what is the law? The law meaning, look, let me say this. Laws are not written for people who would follow them anyway. Laws are written and laid out for those who would break the law. In other words, if I say to my son, take out the trash, every Tuesday is trash day. If I have to create a law, that means I know he's probably not going to do it on his own free will. He's not going to go take that trash out because he doesn't want to. On the other hand, if I watch and observe my son every Tuesday, for some reason, he's taken it upon himself to take the trash out. And he's done this for a year now, and I notice every Tuesday he gets up and takes the trash out because Wednesday is trash day. Do I really need a law for him to take the trash out? Well, no, because he does it. This is where God wants us to be. This is the mindset that we should have towards God, is the heart to do right. I'm not so concerned that I create a bunch of rules for kids to follow so that they they are made to follow them. My end game, and yes, there are rules for a reason, and that reason is to get our human conditioning to the place where we follow the rules because we want to. That's my end game when I set up rules, whether it be for my kids or my employees or whatever. The rules are there for that. Human conditioning is another thing I'd like to speak about. You know, I'd mentioned our origin story, and if you believe the Bible, which I do, a lot of truth in there. I'm not going to get into a big discussion or an argument as to whether or not the Bible is accurate or true. I believe that it is, and I think there's evidence to back that up. But if we believe the Adam and Eve story, and even if it were a fable, it makes sense. What I mean by that is this: we are told in the Bible to renew our minds. You have to renew your mind. I think that's in the book of Hebrews or Romans. And let me throw this in there while I'm talking. Things will pop into my head, forgive me. When we read and study the Bible, not knowing the verse in the chapter is not such a big deal. Do you really think God cares so much that you know the verses and chapters? Because after all, mankind kind of put those in there. That is not how the Bible was originally written. Granted, it's there for a teaching tool, and there breaking it up helps in your study. But this is what I'm trying to get back to, is the studying versus having it in you. If you're just going to study the Bible for the sake of memorizing, if you're just going to study the Bible or other writings, quite frankly, just for the sake of having that knowledge, and it has not become a part of your very being and existence, there's really no point. You'll have a lot of knowledge and understanding, kind of like the example I used with the book. You're going to know about God. You're going to know about things that He deems as right or wrong, but you're not going to have it within you and be a part of you. That is what God is after. He's not after you memorizing the Bible. He's after you having a heart for Him and His ways. And when you reach that, granted, it's a journey, but I want to have more of Him tomorrow than I did the day before. I want to have more of Him now than I did yesterday. And in order to obtain that, I truly have to be a seeker. I truly have to want the right things in my life. You know, I've got kids in my life now. They're not my own, but I view them as my kids. And I tell them all the time, look, I'm not interested in you obeying the rules because you're going to get punished. I'm interested in you obeying the rules because you have a heart to do so. And that's what God wants from us. The Bible talks about God wanting the writings, the law in their heart and in their minds. Jesus talks about the kingdom is not that which you can see, but it is within. And some of the things I've already discussed hopefully have taken your thoughts and your thought processes, your journey, as it were, to a place where you can start connecting some dots. Things just make sense when you're reading the words on the pages and you're tapping into that inner thing. Then you're going to find truth. Things are going to start clicking. They're going to start making sense. I don't know if you recall the cartoons of old. Maybe they still do this, but when I was growing up, I remember seeing the cartoon where whatever character it is was thinking about doing something and he was struggling in his mind, and on this shoulder, he had a little person of himself dressed up as an angel, and over here dressed up as a devil, and they're both in each ear. You know, one's in the right ear, one's in the left ear. Do it, do it, do it. And the other one's, no, don't do it. It's not right. We all have that. We are all created with the God part and the human part. And that's kind of how I explain it to the kids that I deal with. There's the God part and the human part. And the goal is to stop living by the human part, start living by the God part. Another biblical reference would be, don't walk by the dictates of the flesh, your human part, but walk by the dictates of the Spirit, which is God part. When Adam and Eve were on this earth, and let's just take it as a story. Okay, let's not argue over whether or not it actually happened or there was actually only one human being in Adam and one woman in Eve, but let's just take it, the story, for what it is. If it were true that Adam was born perfect and had the heart and mind of God, if it were true that God took Eve from Adam and decided that's going to be his helpmeet, they had the mind of God and that's it. The only thing that God tells them to do is do not take the fruit from the tree of knowledge, which is interesting because I'm trying to encourage you not to soak up the knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but to soak up the scriptures for the concept, for the ideology, if you will, maybe is another word to use. It has to be something that resonates within you, that God part within you, so that you can start to pull away from the flesh, so to speak, or the you self, the self that's human and not God. So Adam and Eve have God's mind about everything, and the only thing he told them to do in this story is do not take of the tree of knowledge, knowing the difference between good and evil. Now, to me, that speaks to the idea that they only knew good. They only knew good. They didn't know the difference. So when they, though, disobeyed God, he changed them. They got taken out of paradise, that perfect place, into the realm that we are currently in, which is, as we all know, imperfect. God took Adam and Eve and removed them from perfection, including how they think, their bodies, their minds. Now, this is where I've done some other studying and reading, and I'm just going to share it because you don't have to take it for gospel truth, but it's a very interesting concept. I believe it to be true because of my life's experiences. But here it goes. So I read some uncanonized books. I can share them one day if you like, but in these writings, I find that, and it would make sense, it would stand to reason. Adam and Eve being pulled out of the Garden of Eden, they now are looking at life totally different than they originally did. They're looking at life, listen to this now, like we currently do. When we go out in the sun, our skin gets warm. Why? Because we have feelings. We're a fleshly being. The Bible even talks about how Adam and Eve were given new bodies. You got to do some searching to find that. But if Adam and Eve were given a different kind of body, a different kind of existence, and when they ate, they had bowel movements, and before they didn't. They experienced illnesses, pain. If they fall, they hurt, they bleed. They didn't have any of that. So they have to wrap their mind, their way of thinking, to the way we currently think. God is looking for us to reverse that process, to take our minds and renew them to the way Adam and Eve originally thought. That is a mind-blowing concept to me that I don't think most of us really think about, how the Bible really does lay out humanity and humanity's ways in a way that we kind of miss sometimes because we get wrapped up in the tiny little details. And, well, what is the Hebrew meaning of this and the Greek meaning of that? And what are the timelines, and when is this going to take place and that going to take place, instead of understanding the concepts that can actually enrich and change and enlighten our lives. When I study the Bible or read the Bible, because I try very hard not to study it, so to speak, I want those concepts to sink in more than I do the words on the pages. Again, God desired that the law be written on the hearts and on the minds of his people. So I'm encouraging you today to take a different approach when you seek God. Take a different mindset. Good example on mindsets and how it can really affect and screw up your day-to-day life. I'm a small business guy. I've owned a gym before in Florida. I currently run a lawn care business, which I've done for a long time. I've had employees. I was a boss at my first job. I was the supervisor and had several employees. And one of the things, I shared that because I'm going to come at something from a business approach. I remember mentoring young men into starting, let's say, a lawn care business. And one of the things that, or current, a better example, I had a friend who had a business and he was afraid to expand, and here's why. Well, if I go and hire someone, then I've got to pay them, and that's going to take out of what I currently make, because I'll have, instead of making, let's say, $50,000 a year, I'm only going to make $30,000 a year because I've got to pay him 20. Whatever number you want to plug in there. Let's say he makes 100,000 and he knows 30 of that's going to have to go to the employee. So now I'm only going to make 70,000. Well, one of the beauties of math is math doesn't lie. The problem is his thinking was wrong. What he didn't realize was when you hire the employee, now business people are going to know this right away. But again, I'm using this as a way for you to think through what I'm trying to get you to understand, and that is this. His thinking was wrong. Our thinking can be wrong when we approach God or even biblical writings or whatever encouraging writings we want to follow. We have to understand there's a concept at play. He totally missed the concept that by hiring the employee, he could then take on more work because the employee is going to take off some of that workload, which means his income will increase. Well, math doesn't lie. The absolute truth is, and I've made a lot of statements about truth mattering, and that's what we're seeking here is truth when we're trying to get a greater walk with God. The truth is, if that employee can make you, I don't know, an extra 30,000, or let's say 40,000 over what you made currently, and then you take that 20 out of the 40, and that is his income, then you've made an extra $20,000. That concept escaped him because he just couldn't get past his own brain. He could not get past his own way of thinking. He was only looking at the expense of the employee instead of what the employee could bring to the table to go above and beyond what he was currently making. Not to mention the stress and the workload that would come off of him. That's just an example. These are the kinds of things that I'm trying to relay to you. The things that I've noticed in my walk with life and God that people just miss. And they're not stupid. It's just they never took the time to unwind, to calm down, to let the chaos of life settle, to shut out the noise and start renewing their mind to the correct way of thinking, to the correct approach to God. We get so busy and mired down in religion that we forget if there really is a God, he wants to find us as much as we may want to find him. Religion is doing something just because you have to do it. It's one example, one definition. A religious activity is usually symbolic of the real deal. When God set up a temple, he never intended the temple to be something that they had to go to. He created the temple and all the symbols in it, they represented something in the heavenly realm. They represented a way for, because he knew the condition of human beings, mankind, that flesh versus spirit, the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. He understood that they needed something that they could wrap their mind around, but he never intended for us to get stuck on those religious things. He meant for us to say, now that I know and can wrap my mind around something tangible, like sacrificing a lamb. We don't do that anymore for good reason, because it only represented something greater, something more true. The lamb itself wouldn't save them. A sinner's prayer won't save you. It's the condition in here. That's what I hope to get you to see and understand. If you've been religious in the past, lose that. Seek God with all your heart and all your soul, and you'll find him. Get away from religion and start seeking a relationship. I promise you'll be happier. We're going to have many, many more videos. Again, I want to encourage you to go to the Presence Network. Good writings in there, very encouraging things. thepresencenetwork.org. And if I'm wrong about that, just Google the Presence Network. You'll find it. I appreciate you. I hope you got something out of this today, and be blessed.